My name is Ethan, and with all due respect to those who cling to faith, I feel my story needs to be told. Not because I want to, believe me, I'd rather these memories rot in the back of my mind, but because their weight crushes me, suffocating every breath, every thought. It's like having an invisible parasite feeding on my sanity. In 2003, at the age of 15, my heart stopped for 6 long minutes. 6 minutes that stretched like a distorted eternity. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the sun still hot on the cracked asphalt of the street, on the familiar walk back home after getting off the noisy yellow school bus. In the 4 blocks between the stop in front of Seo-Juan's little market and my door, a sudden nausea overcame me. There was no warning, no premonition. I had been fine all day, had hastily swallowed my lunch in the school cafeteria, those greasy Bosco sticks with sugary marinara sauce, something I had done hundreds of times. But then, a cold sweat broke out on my forehead, trickling down my neck like icy fingers, descending my spine like a venomous spider injecting its poison. Then I felt that curious flutter in my chest, a trembling, erratic heartbeat, like a bird trapped in a cage. Then another, and another, each weaker, more hesitant than the last. My heart, as I later learned from the doctors with their worried faces and technical words, went into ventricular fibrillation, a useless frenzy of uncoordinated contractions. My breath failed me, the air trapped in my lungs like a knot, and the world around me began to spin, the colors draining away. I fell. The impact with the hot asphalt was a muffled shock, and the smell of dust and oil invaded my nostrils. The rest, they told me, was a sequence of chaotic fragments. I lay sprawled on the street, my face scraping against the hot, rough asphalt. The sharp sound of screeching tires, the hysterical scream of a woman, a driver in a compact car who almost crushed my skull like an eggshell. She stopped abruptly, the car screeching in protest, and tried to revive me, her hands trembling, her voice distant and filled with panic. When she failed, when she noticed the unnatural stillness of my body, she called emergency services, and I was already slipping into a viscous, silent darkness. The paramedics arrived amidst wailing sirens and flashing lights, creating a macabre ballet on the street. They confirmed the obvious, what the absence of a pulse and the pallor of my skin already screamed. My heart had stopped. I was technically dead. They carried my inert body to the hospital in a cold metallic ambulance, the constant beeping of the heart monitor now an anguishing silence. And at some point, on that uncertain journey, they managed to bring me back with a shock, a brutal electric discharge that ran through me like lightning, a piercing agony that tore through the darkness and brought me back to this world. There began a harrowing journey of weeks through the impersonal corridors of the hospital, between the beeping of machines and the strong smell of disinfectant, which culminated in an ablation, a pacemaker coldly pulsating beneath my skin like a foreign object, and a mountain of debt that my family is still paying off, a shadow hanging over every conversation about the future. But my heart, ironically, it's fine, strong and steady, beating to the rhythm imposed by the machine. And please, I beg any force that might be listening, may it continue to beat, because what I learned that day taught me to never thank any God, to question every dogma, every certainty I was ever taught. Because during those 6 minutes, while my lifeless body was being rushed through the city, the siren cutting through the afternoon air, accompanied by 2 paramedics who fought tirelessly to revive me, my soul, or whatever that consciousness separated from my body was, transcended this plane of existence. I visited the afterlife. And there, in that indescribable void, I learned things about our universe, about our very existence, that I wish I had never known, a dark and relentless truth that corrodes my soul every day. Perhaps by sharing my story, by throwing this bomb of truth into the world, I can help our species prepare for what will inevitably come after the end, even if that preparation is futile.
It began with light, blinding, white, pervasive. It wasn't the soft, welcoming light preached in books and sermons. It was a harsh, cutting light that burned my spiritual eyes, even without a body to physically feel it. It wasn't a light that illuminated, but one that consumed, extinguishing all shadows, all references. It enveloped me, but not in a comforting embrace. It was more like being swallowed by a cold furnace. It calmed the last vestiges of instinctive panic, replacing it with a terrifying passivity. It was everything they tell you, yes, but twisted, perverted. Beatific, perhaps, for those who have never experienced the truth behind it. Welcoming like a well-disguised trap. It was the essence of spiritual experiences, stripped of any romanticism. I had the distinct feeling of ascent, as if an invisible force was pulling me upwards into an endless abyss. I passed through several gates, or rather I felt the presence of portals, invisible thresholds that my dazed consciousness barely registered. They weren't physical structures with marble and gold like in paintings. They were more like barriers of energy, of pure intent. I felt the permission to pass through, but also the certainty that if they remained closed, I would be trapped, unable to ascend or descend. Suddenly, I arrived in a place without dimension, beyond reality as we know it. A place that only made sense while I was there, where the laws of physics, logic, causality disintegrated like dust in the wind. I believe that a corporeal being will never fully comprehend the astral plane. Its intangible existence defies any translation into the limited language of the living, any attempt to fit it into our fragile concepts. So what remained were more impressions than images, a silent cacophony of sensations. I was not alone. Several life forces surrounded me upon my arrival. They weren't defined shapes with wings or halos. They were oppressive presences, each an invisible weight crushing my essence, an ancient and indifferent collective consciousness. At first, due to my Christian upbringing, the stories of the Bible echoing in my mind, I thought they were angels. In my incorporeal form, I felt the urge to prostrate myself, to seek refuge. I made the spiritual equivalent gesture of opening my arms, anticipating their embrace, a comfort that never came. Instead, I felt myself shackled by their powers, an invisible force pulling me, binding me, like a helpless insect caught in a sticky web. The beatific light became a torture chamber, revealing itself to be cold and merciless. Humiliation and terror overcame me. These were not the ethereal and benevolent beings I had been taught to expect. They were cruel, unsympathetic overlords, ancient beyond comprehension, to whom I was bound, my soul trembling before their overwhelming presence. Why? I thought, my soul lamenting not with words but with a torrent of pure terror, like a petulant child who had just discovered the true nature of the world's cruelty, a cosmic and indifferent cruelty. Despair tore through my incorporeal being. Something akin to laughter answered me, but it didn't come from a mouth. It wasn't a physical sound. It was cold, mocking, a vibration that resonated in the very fabric of that place, a cosmic scorn that echoed in my own inner void. Thoughts floated into my consciousness, not as words, but as cruel and fleeting images, black birds tearing through the sky of my mind. They delivered horrifying truths about existence that I will do my best to relay to you now, even if the words seem pale and insufficient before the magnitude of the revelation. Our universe, this vast and mysterious cosmos that so fascinates us, like many others running parallel to it in an unfathomable multiverse, contains a paltry amount of the total energy in existence. It is a farm, a cosmic barn, used to produce souls, which only arise in the extremely precise conditions found in our small and insignificant corner of the universe. When scientists talk about the statistical improbability of the existence of our Goldilocks universe, with all the constants finely tuned to allow life, it is because they do not arise spontaneously. It is a carefully cultivated garden. They are designed, and the hands that craft them are not the hands of a benevolent and loving God, but the sharp claws of voracious beings, ancient beyond our imagination, with little or no care for the creatures they generate. We are mere resources, cosmic cattle. Our ultimate purpose, the dark reason for our existence that I learned under the custody of the spirits that shackled me, was to ripen, to develop consciousness and emotion until we were sufficiently rich to be harvested and serve as energetic sustenance in their higher plane. The Big Bang, the creation of the universe that we study so much, gave rise to everything to generate life and eventually humanity, a sufficiently conscious and complex organism that can be harvested for use as energetic slaves in a higher plane, where time and space dissolve into an eternity of servitude. An endless servitude without intrinsic purpose, merely for the sustenance and delight of something that feeds on our purest essence, our emotions, our consciousness. 6 minutes in heaven felt like a lifetime, an existence of psychological terror condensed into a brief lapse of earthly time. I spent it at the mercy of what I perceived to be a childlike spirit, but with a twisted and ancient mind, with a disturbing predilection for psychologically distressing manipulation. It played with me like a sadistic cat with a captured mouse, the sharp claws of mental pain tearing at my soul, reveling in the agony it produced. There was no physical violence, but the violation of my psyche was infinitely more painful. Physical discomforts that we imagine hell inflicting upon us pale in comparison to the searing torment of soul pain. The loss of a loved one is the closest comparison, that piercing emotional damage resulting from trauma. But multiply that infinitely. Add the feeling of total powerlessness and the understanding of the futility of your existence, and you still don't come close to the horror I experienced. When it became clear that my time on earth had not yet expired and I should return, I was instructed, not with audible words, but with a cold and definitive mental implant, not to reveal their existence to the rest of my kind. My reward, the promise whispered in the back of my mind, would be a marginally better station among the slave population, a crumb of privilege in my own eternal damnation. Alternatively, the chilling threat, if I managed to convince others of their existence, new horrors, unimaginable in their cruelty, awaited me upon my return. Horrors that even my exhausted and traumatized mind could not conceive. I cannot imagine anything worse than what I experienced, subsumed beneath an ineffable grief and a torment that still resonates in every fiber of my being, a constant shadow hanging over every moment of my life. For weeks, months later, I tried to explain to anyone who would listen what I had lived through. My parents, my friends, even a therapist. They all looked at me with a mixture of pity and concern. They told me that I had suffered a very serious and traumatic experience for a young man, that the event had left scars on my psyche as well as on my heart. They spoke of post-traumatic stress. I spoke of cosmic condemnation. I gave up trying to convince them. The solitude of my truth was overwhelming. Slowly, like an insidious poison, I began to convince myself that what they said was true. I had simply imagined it all, a vivid and disturbing death dream, as it were. The mind struggling against its own imminent annihilation, desperately trying to make sense of the inexplicable. I wanted to believe the logical explanation, the comfort of science. I needed to believe. Then, years later, I met someone who claimed to have met God. This was a few years later. The dust of my resurrection had already settled, but the terror still pulsed in my veins. The author of a non-fiction book recounting his own near-death experience, a bestseller full of accounts of light, love, and celestial beings, visited my hometown for a book signing. I won't reveal the author's name, as I don't want to invite a lawsuit, which I'm sure he would file against me without hesitation if he read that I dared to question his self-proclaimed sanctity. I attended the event, hidden in the back row, observing the crowd of hopeful and credulous faces. After the reading, with my heart racing and my hands trembling, I confronted him about his story. I looked him in the eyes, searching for any trace of doubt, of fear behind that rehearsed smile and comforting words. And I asked him, my voice almost a hoarse whisper, if he had truly met God, something I'm sure he had dealt with hundreds of times, with a complacent smile and a ready answer. He smiled, a wide, empty smile, and nodded, assuring me with a forced conviction that yes, God is real and full of love, the words slipping out like cheap oil. In a desperate impulse, a visceral need to find someone who shared my burden, I decided to whisper to him the dark truth that haunted me, that slavery awaits us all, that heaven is not a paradise, but a prison. A flicker in his gaze, a microsecond of genuine panic, of recognition of the horror, before the mask of benevolence fell back into place on his face. He tried to disguise it, cleared his throat and looked away for a moment, but I saw it. I felt it. He had truly died and visited the afterlife, but he chose the lie, the comfort of illusion, instead of the terrifying truth in his book. Because he knew. Deep down he knew. He knew the truth of heaven, the horrible place where our souls are destined. And he lives with that lie every day, too terrified to tell the truth, preferring success and adulation to the prospect of being called crazy, a heretic. Just like me, now condemned to carry this dark secret, to live knowing the truth about the emptiness that awaits us. And the worst part of it all is knowing that no matter how much I try to scream, to warn the world, no one will believe me. We are irredeemably alone, on the edge of an abyss of truth that slowly consumes us. Do you think there is anything we can do to change our fate? Or are we all irredeemably condemned to cosmic servitude? And if so, how can we live with this unbearable truth until our inevitable end? The prospect haunts me, stealing my sleep and filling my days with constant anguish.